Good morning, everybody. Welcome along and thanks for joining our webinar, Leading the Charge to 2030, Vodafone's Journey to an Electric Future. I'm Paul Hine, I'm the Commercial Director at Arval UK, so I'll be your moderator for today. This is the second in our mini-series of two electric vehicle transition focused webinars. Don't worry if you missed the first one, we'll be sending out a link later so you can watch it on catch up. But in that previous one, we spoke with Alexandra Basarov, who's the Global Head of Sustainable Finance at BNP Paribas, and she talked about net zero emissions, climate change, COP26, and why all those things matter. And we also heard from Sean Sadia, who is our Head of Consultancy at Arval UK, about some of the steps practically that you can take to start your journey towards a greener fleet in the context of that ban on the sale of new petrol and diesel cars in 2030. So with COP26 underway, and yesterday's very well-timed announcement by Rishi Sunak about large listed businesses having to then declare their net zero plan from next year. We'll be talking today with Craig Logan from Vodafone, morning Craig, about their own journey and how they've kind of transitioned from towards that electric fleet in reality. So Vodafone, as I'm sure you know, is one of the UK's largest and most innovative technology businesses. So I think it's going to be really, really interesting to hear about the steps they've taken, how they kind of transition from diesel and petrol through to hybrid and now into electric with the ambition to go full EV by 2027. So nice to see you, Craig. Good morning. Are you all connected and can hear us all right?
Yeah, good morning, Paul. Yeah, all connected, absolutely fine. Good morning, everybody, and welcome. And I hope that you enjoy us talking through our journey at Vodafone.
Thank you. So there should be a panel in the right-hand side of your screen, guys, so you can put questions in. We'll try and get some time for Q&A at the end. Plan is to go for around 45 minutes or so, and we'll see how we go. So perhaps if we can move to the next slide, please. So the key topics then, we'll talk about what made Vodafone decide to make that switch, the barriers that were there and how these were overcome and created the opportunities, how we got the employees to join the journey around driving that EV adoption, and then we'll hopefully share some top tips for the rest of you who want to make that switch. Okay, we'll flick a couple more forward now. Next one just introduces Craig and I. Which we've done, and then I think, Craig, if it's all right with you, we'll get straight to it. So, first question.
Absolutely.
So as an early adopter of the shift towards EVs, what were the key considerations in the business that influenced that decision?
Yeah, so I think we've got to start off really at the beginning of this journey, and that was with some of our driver surveys. So we regularly survey our drivers to understand how the fleet's operating and get feedback based on the offers that we've got across each of our segments. And you know, we were looking at the responses back in late 2018, the early 2019, and we were getting quite a bit of negativity about vehicle choice and about sustainable vehicle options. So it was from that point really that we made the decision that we needed to make a change. We were coming up for a renewal in July 2019. Which was an opportunity for us to completely change the way that we offered our fleet to our company car drivers. And the first steps that we made were to get business sign-off, to talk about perhaps more sustainable fleet choices for our drivers. That had a knock-on impact because as we were approaching and offering more sustainable fleet choices, you know, there was a cost reduction for the employee as well as for the company. So I don't want to touch on anything we might cover later on in the presentation, but you know, those key influences were driven from our employee community. There was a requirement from them to improve the fleet. So we set out with Arval to try and do that and launched our first proposition in July 2019 with PHEV. And then in January 2020, we followed that up with EV. So yeah, really did take steps based on employee feedback to make sure that we're offering the right solutions with a positive impact on our business because of cost savings that were associated to that.
So thank you very much. So I guess we'll come straight to the next one. So you've got big ambition to go completely ice-free by 2027. You know, obviously 3 years before that 2030 deadline. And as a fleet, sort of from a fleet perspective, you've got to sort of plan well ahead of that and go through the different cycles, especially with the different sort of elements of your fleet. So what are the key milestones that you're looking at to make sure that is achieved?
Yeah, well, just to change that slightly. So initially, when we set out on this journey, it was that we would become internal combustion engine free by 2030. We were then asked to accelerate our plans to become internal combustion engine free by 2027. But that changed again in our drive to push forwards and be innovative and also lead from the front as a business. Actually, our strategy changed, and we were asked to become net carbon zero by 2027. So the wheels are in motion already. We've launched PHEV. We worked with our HR teams to make sure that we had all our policies updated. We went out to the employee community. We talked about how we would launch and what we were going to offer, how some of those policies would change. We got buy-in very early from that community. As I said in the previous slide, it was linked to the survey elements that we received back. So that feedback from the survey that's conducted on an annual basis. So that was the starting point. We launched PHEV and we followed very quickly with EV. Adoption for us was quite successful, and some of the factors in that were around making sustainable choices and making some financial savings as well as an individual. So we're already set out on our journey. Our ambitions were to be internal combustion engine free by 2030, which changed to 2027. We now have an ambition to be net carbon zero by 2027, and I'm pleased to say that we've transitioned 66% of our fleet to date.
It's quite impressive, and it's not easy, is it? And especially with such an ambitious net zero across the whole company. I mean, that's, like I already mentioned, that was announced yesterday as an aspiration for a lot of businesses without a deadline on it, and you guys are there already. So I think, we'll talk a bit more, won't we, as we go through about that kind of staff journey, and kind of, it's one thing setting a policy decision centrally, but it's entirely something else making sure that you're bringing the whole company with you. So I guess on that, the next one is that sort of step change for the company. You've touched a little bit about how you promoted it to staff, and as I sort of see in my day job, there are plenty of people out there that kind of, as much as you get the EV evangelists, you get the kind of the exact opposite as well. So how did you guys go about sort of tackling those problems?
Yeah, I think if we go back to the employee survey, there were a number of negative comments around the fleet, and we made those changes quite quickly. We worked across departments to make sure that we could launch a new offer. We changed the policies, as I mentioned. So we'd started to make those changes very early. I think some of the positives of us making that change quite early as well is that there were a number of funding opportunities at that point in order to help with the adoption of EV, various different government grants as well that helped us to push forwards. So we were really positioning and shaping that so that actually we could set out our on a positive journey for adoption. Promoting it to staff, this is a great news story for us, because as we worked with, if you like, the back end side of things, the back of office stuff, we'd worked with HR, we'd launched our policies, we'd amended them, we'd got leadership sign off at a very senior level. So from our perspective, it was all wheels in motion, and we were heading towards that launch. And we almost had a soft launch with PHEV vehicles in July 2019. But the hard launch of the EV cars in January 2020 is a much more successful story, because it was pulling it all together. Drivers at the point in July that were due for their renewal didn't necessarily want PHEV. It was the drivers that were complaining in the customer survey complaints before that wanted PHEV. So actually, whilst we were, it feels like we were probably ahead of the curve and we were making that change early. It does feel like actually sometimes it wasn't quick enough for some of the employee community, because they wanted the next thing and they wanted it now. Promoting it to staff, I think, was very simple. I think we set out 3 different types of approach for our employees. One of them, with the support of Arval, was to set up a ride and drive event. So a number of the manufacturers that we were going to put onto our vehicle list supported us with these ride and drive events, which were set up and down the country. That gave employees that were looking to switch their company cars within the few months of us launching, and probably onwards, an opportunity to come and drive something that was still fairly new. Electric vehicles were on the road, but at the point that we launched, there was limited EVs with reasonable range. And actually, I think people still had a little bit of a fear factor over switching to EV. So the ride and drive events that we set up and down the country were an opportunity for those drivers to come into the office, to sit in a car, to talk to an expert, try and understand the vehicle, get a feel for it, take it out on a test drive and bring it back. And actually, if we think about how we operate our company car scheme, drivers have an opportunity to book a test drive in advance of them making a car order. So it almost, by setting up the ride and drive events, we may not have given a car to an employee looking to switch or looking to order their new vehicle. By having that opportunity, by bringing them onto our own sites, we may not have been able to give them 3 or 4 days test drive, but they were immediately able to drive that vehicle, and we had a good changeover of staff throughout that day. So actually, our ability to get drivers pushed through those cars, if you like, accelerated that adoption as well, because they'd already driven it and they'd already had an opportunity to become a bit more familiar with the technology with the vehicle. So that was a really positive factor. I think we always must be mindful that, in doing this, there is essentially a change in policy, a change in strategy, and things will be different. And, that means employees might need to book their mileage in a different way, or, go into a different system. So, through any change, whether that's, an IT change, a technology change, with our fleet change, it was important that we brought as many people along on that journey as possible. So we set up a number of webinars internally, encouraged people to come and listen to what it was that we were doing, to listen to our strategy for rolling out electric vehicles, and to ask questions. And there's a Q&A at the end of the session, but I firmly believe that we can tell people as much information as they want, but there will be uniqueness between each individual's position. And actually, sometimes when you're trying to put across your strategy and your plan, it isn't necessarily an effectual strategy. So it's great that we set up those webinars, and there was an opportunity for people to ask questions. If they didn't attend a ride and drive event, there's another opportunity for them to discuss those vehicles.
Yes, it's a really, really interesting, critical point, isn't it, around the comms, and especially with you guys going a bit early, when there really aren't that many cars out and about on the road that, your neighbour, for example, or one of your relatives has got one. Whereas now, I think even a year on, it's almost a snowball effect. You're kind of getting that FOMO almost. You've got the nice shiny new cars out in the car park that are plugged in the good spaces by the front of the building, and suddenly, Bob and Jane sitting next to you, you really want what they've got, and it just creates a whole different dynamic and a whole kind of extra layer of that comms, because like you said, you can tell people all the time, the sort of core messages, but until they kind of speak to someone that's completely relatable to their own situation, it doesn't necessarily really resonate. So yeah, it's really interesting. We've had a similar experience with our own EV policy as well. So
yeah, and I would say sorry, Paul, I would say that there's 3 factors that really also helped with that adoption, and that is, electric vehicles actually come with, or traditionally came with, a lot better technology in the car than a traditional internal combustion engine vehicle. Just as an example, yesterday it was frosty, and a number of our drivers would have set their pre-heat on in their vehicles, so that actually when they went out the front door, the car was already defrosted and ready to go. But then, not just the technology aspects of that, but also the fuel saving and switching to EV, and the tax benefits that are associated for the employee as well to make that switch.
Absolutely. I think for me, starting with a plug-in hybrid, I think that one thing of being able to set the car so it's nice and warm in the mornings is absolutely that's the one best thing about EVs compared to a nice vehicle, for sure, for sure. And then you get all the other benefits of the nice kind of greener motoring. So I guess moving on, then you touched on the financial incentives. That's the next question. So clearly there are some. So yeah, do you want to sort of take us through, from your perspective, the sort of financial?
I think we, because we adopted fairly early, we were able to take advantage of some of the government grants that were in place. Now they've changed somewhat in the last year or so, with a reduction in the grant that was available, and also some rules in place around the total value of the vehicle. So by going early, I think we were able to take advantage of that. And as we were positioning the leases and working, and again, I don't want to touch on a question later, but I'm going to say it anyway, is to work on whole life cost. It allowed us to position that vehicle correctly, or those vehicles correctly, within our fleet. They're some of the incentives that we're very lucky. Now, some of those incentives still exist today. So if you're sitting there listening to this and still want to make that change and want to switch to EV, it feels very much like now's the time. There are still some incentives around, and actually, if the longer you wait till you make that change, the more difficult it might be to access some of those. So again, just back on our own story, we were very lucky that when we launched in January 2020, lots of those incentives were available, and we were able to utilise those to launch our fleet. But and I've touched on it as well. It's not just about the physical positioning of the vehicle. There are the savings benefits for us as an employer from a national insurance perspective. Now that is tied into whole life cost. But it's a very beneficial saving, and actually allows us to position that car correctly. We're looking at all of our transition to EV has been through natural adoption. So we still have some legacy drivers that are driving petrol and diesel vehicles. Now our target is 2027. We've shifted our lists, and we've removed internal combustion engine vehicles from some of our lists today. So that helps us support in our transition. And just to revert back to one of the questions earlier, one of our factors for the success for 2027 is we are changing those lists all the time. We are removing vehicles from fleet that actually will perhaps not contribute towards that success. So by taking out internal combustion engine vehicles and switching to just PHEV and EV, with a view to, in the next 6 to 9 months, that we'll only offer electric vehicles, that will tie in quite nicely with our vehicle leases, so that actually when we take on a lease leading up to 2027, we've already got the switch that's been completed. So I think from an incentives perspective, as a company car driver, that legacy fleet, that those drivers that are still in petrol and diesel vehicles, are still paying quite a substantial sum on the benefit in kind tax. And one of the things that we're looking at in consideration with whole life costs and national insurance savings is how could we potentially swap them out early? How could we make that change today? And if you've got a year or 2 years left of your vehicle lease because you're one of those legacy drivers, how can we accelerate that adoption? And I must say, we're working with Arval, with yourselves, to try and calculate that, so that there isn't necessarily a business impact for us, that we can work out what the this return on investment is for early disposal, and achieve that 2027 target actually ahead of our expectation.
Yeah, I think that's another key topic, really. I think the things from my area anyway that we don't really talk about enough is the business benefit. It's very well publicised, the benefit in kind element for the driver, but like you said, the whole life cost, national insurance. I know we'll touch on this later, but it is really, really critical that there's a bit more of a conversation around the business financial benefit to this, as well as the sort of CSR side. And I guess in the context of your final point around that early transition, certainly from Arval's perspective, the market conditions today are such that it's incredibly, unique that if you like, early termination, for want of a better phrase, to kind of move people out of their ICE vehicles, the conditions couldn't be better than in sort of used car market conditions today. So from a funder and a risk perspective, it's much more, you know, akin, and we should be able to be a bit more flexible. So in Arval, just for the benefit of anybody else on the call that didn't know, we gave all of our ICE drivers the option to terminate after 18 months into their 3-year contract if they were moving to a BEV vehicle, and it was incredibly successful. And I guess the sort of warning sign on our side from the financial incentives for the driver was to make sure that people were making the right decision for the right reason, and not just for the financial incentive of basically getting a free company car, you know, so without any benefit in kind. So it's really, again, it's important that these issues are discussed, put in policies, things are put in place to make sure that drivers do make that right decision, and that there is that whole cost dynamic into it. But let's get onto the thorny one then. So the next question around range and that kind of that lovely topic of range anxiety and the ability to charge out and about and home and all the rest of it. It's absolutely the thorny topic. So what are your thoughts, Craig? How did you guys get around it?
Yeah, I mean, I've talked a lot about cars, and I might just touch on vans slightly in this this particular segment. But I'm not necessarily sure that range anxiety is a thing anymore. I think it's probably a convenience anxiety, you know, because there is a sufficient amount of charging posts across the UK, and I think you have to plan your journey sometimes, depending on where you're travelling to and from, and depending on the distance that you travel. So, you know, I was very lucky. I was part of an electric vehicle trial with a manufacturer in 2010, and with Oxford Brookes University, where they surveyed driving styles over a year and looked at that range anxiety piece. And, you know, I think range anxiety at that point in 2010 was a very real thing, because there wasn't the public infrastructure available in order to charge. I remember that I got caught short. The vehicle that I had drove about 110 miles, and I got caught short driving to Swindon and back. I ended up having to stop at a pub and asking if I could charge on an extension lead out the window. So, you know, I can completely understand where range anxieties come from, but I really do think it's the inconvenience factor, because, you know, if you go to a fuel station today and you're driving a PHEV or an ICE vehicle, you can pull up into the fuel station and you top up, and within 5 minutes you're done. You've paid and you've exited. But even with some of the best chargers available on the network today, you know, that convenience of charging, or the convenience of refueling, if you like, is just not quite there yet. And it's difficult, you know, it's difficult, I think, to
I think someone will take care of that, don't worry.
Cool. I thought it was me. Yeah, sorry. It's I think people just need to plan their journeys. I think there is an opportunity there, you know, to charge, and the network's getting better, but it's difficult because of the type and size of power required to bring the same convenience as refueling from a fuel station. Yeah. You know, if you were getting a charge down to 5 minutes and you're putting 50 miles on the car, you know, that takes quite a lot of infrastructure upgrades from an electricity perspective to achieve. So,
yeah, I like the word you use there, that kind of convenience anxiety. I think I'd have the same view. I think the range is fine. You know, I think it is that convenience. And I was talking with somebody just yesterday, actually. You're coming into winter now, and one of the things that in my opinion, and same as the person I was talking to, that is going to be an issue, I think, is you go to a petrol station. Generally, you're undercover. So if it's chucking it down with rain, you know, you can fill up undercover. But if you go to most charging places, they don't have cover. So and especially at night, if it's dark as well, the lighting isn't always great. And if you are plugging in, it's a little bit more of an inconvenience. But these are the sort of real details that will evolve as the infrastructure grows. It's one thing having a charge point that A is available and B works and doesn't require 25 different apps to run it. But actually, the more practical elements really that are going to give these hygiene factors of cover, light, availability, frequency, and as you said, there was a question that popped up. So hopefully we'll come back to this later around that kind of, you know, high mileage users and things like that. It's
well, we just touched briefly there based on range anxiety, but I mean, one of the things that we've done is we set a minimum mileage range for the vehicles that we were taking on to fleet. So I think that helps as well. I think, when we set out, say, our strategy for launching EV, I don't think it was, any good us launching vehicles that had 50, 90 miles range on them, because you really bring an inconvenience for our drivers where actually, we need them to get out and see customers or visit sites or attend faults. And, if they're spending half their day trying to charge their vehicle in order to do that, I think there is a real inconvenience. So one of the standards that we set was, when looking at the list, was that they had to have a minimum range of 200 miles, because 200 miles would be perceived as a reasonable distance, whether you were traveling one way and needed to charge to return, or whether you were able to complete that journey in one day. And, I think this goes on in a question a little later on, but as part of some of that assessment, there was a smart assessment. If we look at our vans that we're looking to transition in the future, we've had to take data from our telematics to look at how our vehicle fleet is being used from a commercial vehicle perspective, how many miles they're completing each day. And that will help our assessment in providing a replacement vehicle that's now an electric vehicle. So, with Vodafone Automotive Telematics, we were able to draw down some of that data and try and understand what our average daily mileage was. Once we can understand what our average daily mileage is, we know what vehicle we need to go after as our primary vehicle in order to transition across on our light commercial vehicle fleet.
And that's the key word, isn't it? Transition. This isn't a light switch. You're not going from one to the other all at one time. You can learn and evolve as you go through. So let's move forward then, because the sort of next question is very relevant around sort of charging on the go. And again, I think there was definitely a question that popped up by one of our viewers today as well. So what's your experience and what have you kind of looked at?
Yeah, so again, I think as with the previous question, I'm probably going to split it into two. And if I get carried away on one subject, Paul, just pull me back and I'll start talking about the other one. But launching cars was relatively straightforward compared to launching our light commercial vehicle fleet EV. And launching cars was easy because people wanted to adopt. There were personal choice vehicles that would support, hopefully, their personal life as well as their business and their work life. So we looked at all of the options. We use the miles consultancy in order to capture our mileage. We worked with them to try and position fuel reimbursement, if you like, or electric charging reimbursement. And we started to explore how we could support drivers using public infrastructure. And actually, the reality was it became quite challenging. It actually became one of the blockers for us launching probably at the point that we were going to in January 2020. So we relied on a mileage rate, and actually, maybe feels like we let drivers explore that field themselves on whether they might go and take up a particular account with a public infrastructure supplier, or whether they might just try and charge at home. Or but what we did do is we installed a number of charging posts across our offices, so that if employees were visiting our own sites, that they could charge, and we provided some guidance on public infrastructure use. But what we didn't do is delve too far into that. Actually, we relied on our drivers to pick up that weight, if you like. And we provided them with mileage reimbursement. So that part was something that allowed us to make that change quite quickly, because it became a bit of a minefield, especially with the different agreements that you've got across charging post suppliers. So, but with our van fleet, it's slightly more challenging, and I've talked about this quite a bit over the last 6 months. Is as we look to, aggressively change our light commercial vehicle fleet from internal combustion engine to EV, there's a bit of a different behavior. Those drivers are in those vans, branded vans. They're representing the company. We need them to be able to attend faults, to be able to attend their daily maintenance activities, if you like. So we really rely on something called uptime. And I use the phrase uptime because we need that van to have as much charge in it throughout the day as possible. We need the van to start on a full charge. We need it to finish the day on a reasonable charge, because in the event that we get a fault and the engineer needs to attend a fault when it's, they've got come to the end of their shift, it's 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, they're about to head home, the van's got 10 miles on it, we get a fault come up that's 100 miles away, the van's only got 10 miles on it, we've got an SLA to attend that fault. How do we do that in an electric van? So it's really important that we give the drivers, our light commercial vehicle drivers, as much support as possible, so that they can, throughout their day, they can keep topping up their vans, and they can ensure that van uptime, that battery uptime, so that in the event we need to respond to a fault or an incident, we can do so without having to think, I need to stop at a charging station. That's going to take me an hour before I can even go and see the customer. So we've had to think a lot more, a lot differently around how we approach that with our van fleet. And I think, our approach will be, that we'll provide the home charger. We'll be able to pick up the data from the home charging for the van, be able to reimburse that. We'll provide a public infrastructure charging card that has open access on various different networks. We will increase our charging posts across our own estate, so that if an engineer is on site completing some works in one of our buildings, whether they're there for an hour or 3 hours, again, they can just contribute towards that van uptime, and then it can support them attending any faults.
I think the van one is really underexplored conversation, and your examples there just absolutely perfectly illustrates the issues, and even with that sort of the urgent response time as well, that add that even further complexity to what what can already be a difficult subject. So I think, certainly from my perspective, we've done a bit of work on this, and I think it's probably another webinar we could do just on the sort of LCV applications to EVs actually. But we will move forward to the next question, which is this kind of, we've got the principle and then the reality, and I think you touched on it again earlier. Sort of, certainly from my perspective, it's that we've got people in our own fleet that don't have ability to charge at home, and you really got to work through. You talked about a number of options in your last example about payment cards and all these sorts of things, but also we've touched earlier on when we were talking about how many miles these vehicles can do now. And actually, if you're running 20, 30, 40 miles a day, you don't even need to charge every day. You can find charge, get away with even once a week. So I think some of these different kind of barriers, perceived barriers, are areas we can sort of knock on the head quite quickly. But what's been your experience so far with the changes you've made?
Yeah, I think whilst there are a field of individuals that are early adopters, they wanted it, they wanted to go EV, they wanted to make the right sustainable vehicle choices, they wanted to be a lot greener, but also I think there was a financial incentive for them to do that. There were some early adopters, and there are those that just a little bit more hesitant, that might not fully understand the technology, or maybe some of this planning convenience sets in, because actually they just want the convenience of being able to fill up and go where they need to go. I can draw on one example. Since our launch in 2020, we're now 66% transitioned across in our fleet, with some legacy fleet that haven't come across. Through that whole change, with the fact that we've got a minimum range set up for any new vehicles coming into the fleet list of 200 miles, we've had one person request to switch back to ICE. And I think, and that might be a convenience factor. It might be they chose the wrong vehicle because they've gone for something that's got 220 miles rather than 320 miles. I think that's a great example of actually, those people that wanted to adopt early and went for it, it's potentially worked, or they've made it work, they've adjusted their lifestyle even slightly, so they might leave slightly earlier, or they might even shift some of their business meetings that might have been earlier in the morning to later. Just, if they've got a long journey to travel, they can charge before attending the site. They might be working with customers as well to access some of their own charging. So I think those people that are a little bit more hesitant to adopt, actually when they have transitioned, have really welcomed the change. And actually, amongst one individual, other than one individual that's asked to switch back, the amount of thank yous or what a great scheme that we've got as feedback from our drivers is phenomenal. The driver survey that we conducted last year, people weren't complaining about ICE, other than a little bit to do with the big tax and these legacy drivers, but the complaints were all around PHEV and us moving now to EV when some of those early adopters went to PHEV in July rather than waited until January to go EV. So whilst we're still attracting some of those complaints, it feels very much like a success that we've launched, that we've overcome some of those challenges. Some that I mentioned earlier with trying to sort out public infrastructure charging potentially for our car drivers, and then stepping away from that conversation and allowing them to fight for themselves a little bit. But actually, that's no different than them fighting for themselves when they were driving a company car that was a petrol or diesel, because they still had to find a fuel station, they still had to top up their vehicle. It's no different. So I feel very much like we kind of went into a war room and touched on different segments and how would we do this and how would we do that, and very quickly and swiftly we unpicked that and tackled it and launched the solution that we've got today. And as I say, that's slightly more challenging when you look at the van fleet, but I think the solutions are there, and there are some gaps for some of those really high mileage van drivers. But for the majority of our fleet, and taking the data that we've got from our telematics devices, actually enables us to make some key strategic decisions about what we are going to do and when's the best time to make that next step. So yeah.
That's good, and using the data kind of takes emotion out of it, doesn't it? And it's so funny now. Sort of in a previous life before I was at Arval, I was involved in changing fuel card provider from one to another. And honestly, the kind of the resistance to that, because people get used to going to their local fueling station, and perhaps a new card provider wasn't able to do that, and but then you sort of take that simple solution and then apply that to a EV transition with cars and vans, like you guys have done. It's just a whole nother level. So yeah, it's like you said, like you've explained, there's many different ways to sort of to deal with the problem in a big sort of holistic way. But let's move.
Sorry, but something that I perhaps didn't touch on, and I think it is important as well, is that we did set up various partnerships for home installations, and whilst we didn't fund those for our car drivers, we made sure that there was a solution in place that actually it was easy to get hold of and easy to access, and that was set up via Arval with Motion. So we were able to bring that whole piece together. So that actually when we launched the cars, whilst we weren't providing the public infrastructure support, actually there was some home infrastructure support that could be provided to help.
That's good. It's a perfect segue into what is clearly the most important question in this entire session today, which is how has Arval been able to support you with this transition?
Yeah, so I've touched on various different items, I think, throughout, because this has very much been a collaboration. I think we've set out our strategic targets. Our intention was to become internal combustion engine free by 2030 to 2027, to becoming net carbon zero by 2027. The goalposts have changed, but we've been able to do that, as I say, in collaboration with Arval. We talk about what it is we want to achieve, and then we set out how we may go about achieving that. We have had some support with access to consultants at Arval, who carried out a smart assessment for us. The smart assessment gave us a bit of a positioning piece, and again, I don't want to touch on questions that we may cover in a minute, but actually positioning the vehicle within the fleet list from a HR perspective. When you look at the previous leasing agreements and the leasing cost, and then you switch to WLC, it was almost a flat rate change. But if you were to look at a flat lease cost for an electric vehicle, and you didn't incorporate the national insurance savings and fuel savings, then it can seem very, very expensive. So you're not necessarily getting that that whole life cost, the whole cost of the vehicle. So I think that was really important. The smart assessment brought out some of that, and it also gave us an opportunity and some advice on changing some of our internal policies. So actually looking at, how would we apply the fuel rate? What would we do in a PHEV scenario? And what would we do in an EV scenario? Once we set that up and you look at a previous mileage rate that is associated to those figures coming out from government, and we adopt that for the AER, the advisory electric rate, actually we've set things in place that will naturally continue on. It's not like we have to go through a 6 monthly or quarterly review based on the reimbursement rates, because we just we align into the government figures.
Yeah, and again, it's sort of, we touched on it earlier, didn't we? And in fact, it's probably a good time to just pop to the next question, which is kind of sort of the whole life cost, because it is important, and it's, as an ex-accountant, it's or I suppose still am an accountant, it's it is one of the most critical elements of that EV transition. You take the environmental elements away from it, but the immediate perception, in my view, of 99% of people, certainly decision makers, is, well, EVs are really expensive. How is this going to work out when compared to an ICE? But we've spoken a few times, haven't we, during today, about whole life costs. But I'd like to hear your views on how you.
Yeah, I mean, this was absolutely crucial. I think when you look at employing an individual, one of the factors, if they get a company car, is the company car band that they would get, and that is related exactly to a cost per month. And I think if you were to take a lease comparison from an electric vehicle to a internal combustion engine vehicle, then there is a little bit of an increase in price there. Certainly at the point that we were looking at adopting, because it was very early into the world of EV, and actually the vehicles that were on the market that had a minimum range of 200 miles were very expensive compared to their ICE equivalent. So it was crucial for us to get sign off and launch to look at the whole life cost of vehicles, so that the bandings from a HR perspective didn't necessarily adjust. The only thing that we changed is that we changed the personal contribution from employees. So actually, some of those slightly more expensive vehicles, even if we looked at whole life costs that were dropping into the bands for our employees, there was more of an opportunity then for a trade up. And that really helped us make sure that we could populate the list with reasonable vehicle choices. And we talked about the funding aspects from government as well. And actually, some of that funding in those government grants has gone away. But actually, I guess competitions has come on now as well, and there are more vehicle choices. But I still believe that the grants are available today, and they're geared at the lower rate vehicles. And with whole life cost applied across the top of that, it makes for a really competitive vehicle choice that can go into the list. And if we didn't use whole life costs, I think we wouldn't have been able to launch EV, because we wouldn't have taken all of the factors in from a finance perspective into that equation.
Yeah, I think for the benefit of everybody else on the webinar today, it's the whole life cost it's a perennial issue in the industry. It feels scary if you don't know what it is, but actually it really isn't. It is literally, you just are taking all the costs you are seeing in your fleet today in different buckets and putting them all into the same bucket, so you can really apply that kind of like for like comparison. So clearly Arval, we can help you through that if that's something of interest to you. But it's a really good illustration, Craig, of why it's important and how it sort of helps you overcome those original kind of barriers. So just a little nod to the time. We've sort of hit time, but we've got one more question in the core session that I really like to kind of touch on, and then for people on the webinar, if you're welcome to sort of stay on, we can run it up to 12 o'clock if anyone wants to, just to run through some of the Q&A that have come through. But the final and probably the most important question is, what advice, Craig, have you got for anyone wishing to follow in your footsteps?
Yeah, I think we try to provide some of our examples and maybe touch on some of our challenges and actually what was easy to do and what was difficult to do. But I think my question would be almost in reverse. Why wouldn't you change? Why wouldn't you make that change to EV? The government are pushing. They've provided some funding support towards it. That funding support's coming down. As you look at the price of internal combustion engine vehicles, if you look at the challenges and the cost for the employee, they're just going up and up and up. The big tax rates for electric vehicles are going up as well. So if you're, the later you make that change, the more expensive it is for your company from an NI perspective, the more expensive it is for your employees. And you're not, when you do eventually transition, you're not going to get as much benefit because the cost of the electric vehicle is increasing as well from an employee perspective. So I think, I feel like turning it around and just saying, why not change?
It's good. It's good. I totally agree, and I think we're certainly seeing it as we touched on earlier, didn't we? The acceleration to it. We've now had in the budget a couple of weeks ago. We've got confirmation now that the current BIC tables will stay as they are till 2025, which we'll see through most cycles now for people that haven't. I see it day in day out. There's many companies that haven't yet even started on this journey. So. I think your kind of point there, and why wouldn't you, is a really good one. And I think the comprehensive kind of nature of what you've done with the cars and the vans and everything that goes with it is a really fantastic example for us to use to illustrate today. So I think.
Paul, sorry, to cut across. Just we worked very closely with HR to make sure we launched these policies and we got the vehicles onto the list and we made it live. But there is another factor, and the other factor is about attracting talent. If you're going out to the marketplace and you're looking to recruit individuals, you're providing them with a diesel vehicle, they're going to be hit with a huge tax bill before they've even thought about what their salary offer might be. So we're finding it's a huge draw to attract talent as well by offering this fleet list and it's electric vehicle options that are on that list too.
Yeah, I think again another topic not generally spoken about, but becoming ever more critical. Certainly in certain demographics, certain skills, certain disciplines that you use. So I guess it was like it was. I don't know, maybe 20, 30 years ago when a company car was seen as a real kind of perk and a real important sort of benefit, and it kind of eroded a bit with the benefit in kind rates for diesels and things in the early sort of late noughties, early tweenies, and now it's sort of coming back in as being that real kind of lever to kind of make you stand out in the crowd when you're looking for talent. So you're absolutely right. Well, thank you very much. I think that's the kind of main questions over. So Craig, if it's all right, I wouldn't mind taking one or two questions. We've had a few coming in, and any that we don't get to, we'll make sure we get answers to you and sort of ping back. But there's a couple that have been sort of pinged through to me that I think we touched a little bit, but let's go in a little bit more. So one is around high business mileage drivers. So we've got people that are driving throughout the day, but people who might not have access to home charges. And so can't do that overnight charge. We did touch on it. It's something that comes up very regularly in this world. Even in Arval, in our own policy, we've got people like this. So I guess if it's all right, Craig, I'll give my quick view and then chip in on what you think. But I think it is that kind of that ABC, always be charging. So in my life, in my sort of up and down the motor, I don't have a charging point at home. I can have one, but I don't have one currently. So, it's always the first question that I ask when I'm going somewhere is, do you have a charger? Can I use it? And that could be an office, it could be a customer, a supplier, hotel, and probably in my experience, the most difficult one are the hotels, because most don't have, they might have one or two, but there'll always be a car there and it's always parked there overnight. So it's really hard to get charged. So it is absolutely, and I think Craig, you made the point earlier, when you're traveling to somewhere, get on ZapMap, find out where the charge point is, get your journey plan so you can still have a coffee, make a phone call, check emails, whatever, and just kind of have that kind of foresight, a bit more effort and planning. So, Craig, any sort of different view from you?
Not terribly, but I will add in, the different types of power that are provided across public infrastructure means that you can access something that will give you a quick charge, a rapid charge. You might be able to get a reasonable amount of charge in half an hour. And then there are other parts of the network that are low kilowatt hour supply. So actually you could, leave your vehicle there and let it charge overnight. And one of the things, I sit on on a specialist interest group for the Association for Fleet Professionals, which is around EV. And one of the things that they're lobbying at the moment is to do with curbside charging, because actually there is a large proportion of household owners that don't have a drive that need to be able to charge vehicles. So I think with looking at this curbside charging proposal, it really does give that opportunity to be able to leave your vehicle close to your home and allow it to charge overnight.
Yeah, and again, I guess my final point on that would be it's kind of consider how long you've got to travel. If your car, for argument's sake, has a 200-mile range and you've got a 100-mile journey, you don't have to fill the whole. You don't have to go to 100% charge. To get yourself started, you could kind of get halfway there, don't have your brake or whatever. It becomes that convenience factor, that planning factor. So the other question that's come through is around private mileage. So Craig, I'm not sure if you've tackled this in your scheme, but the question that's come through is how do we manage private mileage? If the driver is able to charge the car at home, how can you kind of reimburse that versus that current kind of fuel cost? So I don't know if that's something you've tackled so far.
Well, I think I've touched on it, and that is that it's up to the driver driving the vehicle to be able to charge their vehicle, and then we will provide a reimbursement rate based on the advisory electric rate. So it allowed us not to get tied up in something that's quite complicated when we were looking to launch, because we were providing a standardized, I think, approach to reimbursement, because that wouldn't necessarily be any different than driving an internal combustion engine vehicle, where you may fill up that vehicle and then you put in your mileage claim for the miles that you've done for business. So I think that's how we approached electric vehicles.
Yeah, and I think in fairness, that's how most companies are operating it. Arval included in that. But I would say again, for the benefit of the person who asked the question and anyone else on the call, there are technological solutions out there. So currently no benefit in kind if you are providing free electricity for your people, so there's no additional benefit in kind on that. And there are solutions with certain home chargers that are sort of smart and can flip between kind of personal or private and business mileage, and within your own home you can kind of automatically bill back the electricity you're using in the charge point compared with the electricity you're using in your house. So there are absolutely technical solutions to this, and it comes back to the same real kind of fundamental point about the whole thing. It's about policy, about what you want to do. I've spoken to real, very, very passionately about certain people that it shouldn't be free charging, for electric. You wouldn't do it for petrol or diesel. You shouldn't do it for electric because it's creating a kind of a false impression. But actually, there's many other financial incentives from a driver's perspective. But so I guess my point would be there are solutions out there. I'd encourage you to get in touch with Arval, and we can kind of we can help you through the exploration on those. I think we've covered most of them actually. So the questions that have just come through since, and I think we have touched on most of them. Most of them are around kind of that, mileage, that charging en route. How do you kind of cope with it day to day? Which I think we have touched on most of those. So I think probably at 5:02, it's probably about time to wrap up. So Craig, I think it's been absolutely fascinating. I think you've been brilliant. So thank you so much for your time today. Really, really brilliant. Hopefully everyone else has enjoyed it as much as I have. And for everyone on the call, so we will send out a link so you can watch this back at your leisure. And I thank you very much for your time. So Craig, again, thank you very, very much for your time today.
Thanks, Paul.
Cheers, guys. Right, we'll wrap it up there. Thanks a lot. Bye bye.